Good morning and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if Portugal had Spain's colonies and Spain had Portugal's colonies. Portugal and Spain were the earliest European colonizer of their time. Spain famously discovered the Americas, while it is clear that the Americas were already known to the Vikings and of course to the native inhabitants of the Americas. Portugal and Spain were in a rush, or well, actually Spain was in a rush to get access to the spices of India, and not just that, of course. Other resources and power as well, they were very important. Spain and Portugal, they were racing and they wanted to get this dominance over the seas. Portugal and Spain, well, in here I refer to Spain as Castile and Aragon, or Castile and Aragon are referred to as Spain, to make things not so complicated, were not always on best terms. But after the discovery of Cipangu and Antilla, which are the alternative names of the Caribbean islands that Columbus discovered, Columbus stopped first in Lisbon, where he talked to the Portuguese king. The Portuguese king got mad and would arrange everything he could to take possession of these lands. Isabella and Ferdinand knew that, as of the moment, Portugal was much stronger on the sea than they were, and they saw the diplomatic way out of it. King John II of Portugal made reference to a treaty that was signed in 1479, the Treaty of Alcazovas. He thought that the lands found by Columbus would be south of the Azores, and that's why it angered him. The Pope arranged the Treaty of Tordesillas, and the world became divided. One side was reserved for Portugal and the other side for Spain. Spain got most of the Americas except for the very tip of Brazil, and Portugal got most of Africa and most of Asia, except of course for the Philippines. But what if all of that changed? What if Portugal had Spain's colonies and Spain had Portugal's colonies? Let's just say that in this timeline around, either Portugal would already have prior knowledge of the Americas, or John II would believe that the Americas were far more valuable than the spice trade with India, China, Indonesia and even Africa. Let me paraphrase it. John II would believe that the distance towards India, China, Indonesia and these new lands, this distance would make everything cheaper for the Portuguese, that going around Africa would actually be a waste of time. Let's not forget that Portugal was much smaller than Spain and would need more manpower, more resources to go around Africa, only to be then later on in India. And even the hostility of the Ottomans would bring a lot of problems. So why not just pass on the other side, where it could maybe be sped up, where you need less manpower, and also where it could be just in general cheaper and better. As a result, Portugal would actually insist on getting the parts that were reserved for Spain in our timeline, while Spain would get the parts reserved for Portugal in our timeline. Yes, Spain would normally not just accept, but for the sake of this scenario, let's say Spain would accept it. They would think that the Portuguese would be dumb, and going around Africa and then to India, that would not be really a problem for them. And they had more manpower than the Portuguese, and they could also deal with any hostility. Portugal would have a few waves. First wave would be in Brazil, another one in the Caribbean, and the next one would be on the Aztec territory. The Portuguese, they were different colonizers than Spain, and mostly just occupied a small bit of lands. But seeing how the Caribbean were so easy to pick, the Portuguese would be very motivated and hungry for more. Keep in mind that I say that the Portuguese would also take Brazil. Why? Well, the Spanish, they had no real idea about the geography of that time, and on Portugal's insistence in our timeline, the line in the Treaty of Tordesillas was moved a little bit towards Brazil. Spain in this alternate timeline would still not know much about the geography, and as a result, they would almost get nothing out of the Americas, not even a single slice. The Americas would for some time see a Portuguese colonization effort. Much of southern Brazil, Uruguay and northern Argentina, they would be colonized without any issues. Some islands in the Caribbean as well, and Mexico probably too. Why that? The Portuguese would probably be tempted by the natives in one way or another to conquer the Aztecs, and with the sickness spreading and weakening the demographics in the Americas, Portugal would also have an easy time taking over these places. I also think that seeing these sacrifices that the Aztecs were doing in our timeline and also in this alternate timeline would just totally shock the Portuguese, and they would, in the name of Christianity, but also of course for the resources and because the other natives would provoke them to do so, actually make it their mission to destroy the Aztec kingdom. As for the Incans, I still believe that the Incans could be doomed, especially if Portugal would find out about the gold that existed in their lands of the Incans. One important thing to note, however, is that the Americas would not get the caste system, while Africa and Asia, they would experience something else in this timeline. I'm not saying that the Americas would be a land of rainbow colors and of peace and social cohesion, but the society would be a little bit less divided in there. Just imagine it as a bigger Brazil with more native influence, for instance. I believe that the Spanish would be able to hold lands in South Africa and in other parts of Africa, bigger than what Portugal officially had in our timeline. In Asia, things may get a bit trickier, and even there the Spanish, they would be able to defeat most of the enemies and have fierce battles against the Ottomans. Maybe even an alliance with Ethiopia could be very likely and something official. As for India, Spain may actually adopt a strategy that would ensure them a short-term victory, but over time they would get kicked out of many parts and would have to learn how to treat the natives and how to negotiate with them. Indonesia would be interesting. Spain would most likely colonize Indonesia and mix with the population in there. Same would go on in the Philippines this time around. The economy would be based mostly on spices, but also rice would be exported in Europe and become more important, or even as important as potatoes in our timeline. Indonesia would be more Christianized this time around, and the Spanish would be able to make claims around in Oceania, and would still irritate Japan with Christianization efforts. India too, and some parts of Africa, they would not really receive the missionaries well, but with a lot of efforts, Christianity would become much stronger and more present in Asia. A caste system would also be established in Spanish colonies, and we could see even a lot of black people in Indonesia working in several mines, for instance, or jobs that would be physically exhausting. At the same time, Indonesia and the Philippines would become also more white than in our timeline. Back in the Americas, Portugal would not be able to hold all their colonies at once. And this time around, instead of taking Indonesia from Portugal, the Dutch would take a huge chunk of Brazil, for instance, from Portugal. And France too could take parts like maybe Texas and some parts of the Caribbean. Portugal and England, they would still get their alliance going on, but at the same time the Iberian Union may still have happened. I'm not sure how the colonies would be changed and how the Spanish they would then treat the Portuguese colonies, but let's say for the sake of the scenario that they would just continue the Portuguese laws. The Americas would be more like a big Brazil, and it is possible that the colonies would be structured in way bigger regions or subdivisions, while Indonesia and the Philippines could be more split. Africa would not be totally colonized before the discovery of treatments against malaria, for instance. Another important point would be that if all the butterflies involved, Napoleon would still arise, then Portugal would most likely not lose their colonies, as the king would then go to, let's say, Portuguese Caribbean, Portuguese Mexico or Brazil, while Spain would most likely lose their colonies, but later regain some colonies back after a costly war. Parts of Africa they could be easily be taken back, while Indonesia, the Philippines, parts of Australia could be lost to a native or mestizo regime, or they could be just taken over by another European superpower. There may be a chance that Spain could even be less powerful in this scenario compared to OTL, while Portugal, due to their different approach, they would have a chance of staying relevant, integrating much of the population, and we could actually see the true rise of Luso-tropicalism. Maybe a Portuguese version of the Imperial Federation could happen. Britain and Portugal, they would rule together over the seas for a long time, increasing their economy, increasing their trade, and by bailing each other out militarily speaking. Portuguese would be more widely spoken, but so would Spanish, and it could even after the dissolution of the Spanish Empire become the lingua franca of much of South and Southeastern Asia, and even Australia and parts of Oceania. I also think that one big power could form and rise from the former Spanish colonies, and have a huge naval power. Africa, on the other hand, would, like in OTL, be divided, but in a different way. However, Spain would not be powerful enough to drive out most of the Europeans, and they would be at the mercy of the international conferences. I think that Portugal would have a way bigger chance of becoming something like a global power than Spain at this point, and probably even have a very similar role or influence as Britain. And that's where we leave it for now.
That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Alt History.